November 19, 1941. The pride of the Australian Navy, HMAS Sydney, engages a disguised German raider. Then, it vanishes. Not a single survivor from its 645 crew members was ever found, sparking 67 years of conspiracies, cover-up allegations, and a nationwide mystery. In 2008, that mystery was solved. The wreck was located 2,500 meters below the surface, providing the first physical evidence of the battle. But this discovery did not close the book. It opened a new chapter. The forensic data from its shattered hull tells a story of tactical errors and catastrophic damage that contradicts the official narrative. How did a superior warship fall into such a devastatingly simple trap? And what does the evidence now prove about Australia's greatest naval disaster? The answer lies in the wreck itself. The complete separation of Sydney's bow section reveals the nature of her demise was not tactical, it was deceptive. When discovered 2,468 meters below the surface, the forensic evidence painted a clear picture. Sydney approached within point-blank range of what it believed was a friendly merchant vessel. The physical evidence speaks volumes. The severed bow, sheared completely from the main hull by a massive internal explosion. Shell damage concentrated at close range, not scattered as would be expected in a long-range artillery duel. Most tellingly, a direct hit through the bridge at the compass platform. A 15-centimeter shell hole that likely killed the command staff within seconds of the battle's commencement. These aren't theories. They're forensic facts etched in steel at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. But to understand how Australia's most advanced warship fell into this trap, we must go back to the beginning of its final voyage. HMAS Sydney was no ordinary warship. A modified Leander-class cruiser, it had already earned legendary status in the Mediterranean, sinking the Italian cruiser Bartolomeo Colleoni in July 1940 during the Battle of Cape Spada. This victory had made Sydney the darling of the Australian nation, a symbol of naval prowess and national pride. By September 1941, after distinguished service in the Mediterranean, Sydney returned to Australian waters under the command of Captain Joseph Burnett. Her new assignment seemed mundane compared to her glorious Mediterranean exploits. Escort duties between Fremantle and Sydney, routine patrols of the Western Australian coast. This shift from intense combat to routine duties bred a dangerous complacency. The crew had grown accustomed to the relative safety of Australian waters, far from the European theater where the war raged at its most intense. What they did not know was that danger had followed them home. Hidden across the Indian Ocean lurked a deadly predator, HSK Kormoran, one of Germany's most sophisticated merchant raiders. Converted from a freighter, she was armed with 6 guns of 5.9-inch caliber, torpedo tubes, and 300 sea mines, all carefully concealed behind fake deck structures and false panels. Her captain, Theodor Detmers, at just 38 years old, was the youngest raider commander in the German Navy, tasked with a critical mission: disrupt Australian shipping lanes and wreak havoc in the supposedly safe waters of the Indian Ocean. By November 1941, after months of uneventful patrols, Sydney's crew had fallen into the comfortable rhythm of routine operations. What awaited them off the Western Australian coast would shatter that comfort forever. At 3:35 in the afternoon on November 19, 1941, approximately 120 nautical miles west of Shark Bay, HMAS Sydney spotted what appeared to be a merchant vessel on the horizon. The ship was the German raider Kormoran, expertly disguised as the Dutch freighter Straat Malacca, flying Dutch colors with false cargo visible on deck. What happened next would become Australia's greatest naval disaster. It was a textbook study in tactical deception and the fatal consequences of momentary complacency. Sydney challenged the vessel, closing the distance between the two ships and flashing the message, "You should make your signal letters." When replying to Sydney's signal, the raiders' flag hoist was deliberately fumbled and raised in a position partially obscured by the funnel, making it difficult to read. Captain Burnett of Sydney, following standard protocol for identifying unknown vessels, continued to approach. This was standard procedure. Suspicious vessels were to be investigated at close range. But it was exactly what Detmers had anticipated. By 4:15 in the afternoon, Sydney had closed to approximately 1,000 meters, point-blank range for naval combat, and had shut down its aircraft. The cruiser was now positioned almost a beam of Kormoran to starboard, less than a mile distant. Both ships were steering west-southwest at about 14 knots. The critical moment came when Sydney hoisted a two-flag signal bearing the letters IK, the two center letters of Strat Malacca's four-letter secret identification signal. It was the final test. The Germans could not interpret this signal, and Sydney demanded in plain language, "Show your secret sign." With his vessel's true identity about to be exposed, and with the element of surprise still intact, Detmers gave the fateful order at approximately 5:30 p.m. Strike the Dutch colors, raise the German naval ensign, and open fire with all armament. The trap was sprung with devastating effect. Kormoran's first salvo struck with pinpoint accuracy, hitting Sydney's bridge, likely killing Captain Burnett and the command staff instantly. Simultaneously, the raiders' guns targeted Sydney's gun turrets, torpedo tubes, and anti-aircraft batteries. The German gunner's aim was deadly accurate, concentrating fire on the cruiser's vital areas. Sydney's own guns opened fire almost simultaneously, but with her bridge destroyed and central fire control knocked out, her first salvos passed over Kormoran without inflicting damage. The Australian cruiser was already fighting blind, her command structure in chaos. Within minutes, a torpedo from Kormoran struck Sydney amidships, sealing her fate. The explosion tore through the hull, setting off secondary explosions and fires. Despite catastrophic damage, Sydney's X-turret managed to score several critical hits on Kormoran, ensuring the raider would not survive the encounter either. For about an hour, both ships blazed furiously. Sydney, mortally wounded, attempted to withdraw, steering south-southeast with her bow visibly riding lower in the water. By 6:25 p.m., Kormoran, with her engine room wrecked and uncontrollably ablaze, Kormoran ceased firing. Detmers ordered the raider abandoned and set scuttling charges. At 12:30 in the morning, the charges and Kormoran's cargo of mines detonated, sending the raider to the bottom. The last the Germans saw of Sydney was a distant glow on the horizon, slowly fading into the gathering darkness. By midnight, even that faint flicker had disappeared. Of Sydney's 645 men, not a single survivor was found. The pride of the Australian Navy had vanished without even sending a distress signal. When Sydney failed to arrive at Fremantle on November 20th, 1941, initial concern was tempered by the possibility of routine delays. When she had still not returned by November 23, 1941, the worried Naval Board signaled her. There was no reply. It was not until 5 p.m. on November 24, 1941, that the first clue emerged when the British tanker Trocus reported rescuing 25 German seamen from a raft northwest of Carnarvon. Within days, 317 of Kormoran's 399 crew members had been rescued from lifeboats and rafts. The Germans were interrogated extensively, providing the only eyewitness accounts of the battle. Australia launched a massive air and sea search, but the only trace of Sydney ever found was a damaged, empty Carly life float recovered by HMAS Heroes on November 27, 1941. The nation's most celebrated warship and its entire crew had simply vanished. In February 1942, 3 months after the battle, another Carly float containing the corpse of a sailor washed up on Christmas Island. The unknown sailor was buried with full military honors. A 1949 investigation concluded he was not from Sydney, but modern forensics would later prove this wrong. In 2021, DNA evidence finally identified him as able seaman Thomas Welsby Clark, believed to be the only sailor to have made it to a life raft after Sydney went down, only to die at sea. As years turned to decades, the mystery deepened. The loss of Sydney with all hands, compared to the survival of most of the Germans, bred suspicion. Conspiracy theories flourished in the absence of physical evidence. Some alleged the Germans used illegal ruses. Others claimed Japanese involvement before Japan's official entry into the war. There were accusations of survivor massacres and government cover-ups. The families of 645 Australian sailors were left without closure, with nothing but questions and the sea's eternal silence. For many Australians, the German account of the battle remained suspect. How could their superior warship be destroyed so completely with no survivors? This national wound remained unhealed for generations, the truth seeming lost forever in the depths of the Indian Ocean. By the 1990s, public interest in solving the mystery had intensified rather than diminished. On August 26, 1997, the Australian government requested a parliamentary investigation into Sydney's sinking. The resulting report, published in March 1999, recommended that the Royal Australian Navy sponsor efforts to establish the likely area of the battle and locate the wrecks. Enter shipwreck hunter David Mearns, who first learned of the battle in 1996 and began studying it in 2001 with a view to finding the ships. What distinguished Mearns' approach was his methodical return to primary sources, including the rediscovery of archive files and diaries. Most significantly, Mearns learned through researcher Barbara Winter of a remarkable primary source, a German-English dictionary owned by Kormoran's Captain Detmers. While imprisoned after his capture, Detmers had ingeniously hidden his battle report as barely discernible dots under letters in the dictionary. This, along with other clues, would prove crucial to Mearns' search. With other German accounts, convinced Mearns that the approximate position given by the Germans, around 26 degrees south, 111 degrees east, was accurate. A volunteer group called the Finding Sydney Foundation partnered with Mearns and secured nearly $5 million in government grants and private donations to fund a 45-day search beginning in February 2008. Mearns' strategy was to first locate Kormoran, then use that position to narrow the search for Sydney. Using advanced sonar technology aboard the vessel Geosounder, the team faced initial setbacks from Tropical Cyclone Ophelia and equipment malfunctions. Despite these challenges, on March 12, 2008, they located Kormoran at a depth of 2,560 meters, with two large pieces 1,300 meters apart and an oval-shaped debris field between them. Using this newly discovered wreck and the German accounts describing Sydney's heading, speed, and last sighting after the battle, Mearns calculated a dramatically smaller 20 by 18 nautical mile search box for the cruiser. Just after 11 a.m. on March 16, 2008, Sydney was found at a depth of 2,468 meters, approximately 12 nautical miles from Kormoran. Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd announced the discoveries to the nation on March 17, 2008. After 67 years, Australia's greatest naval mystery had been solved. The discovery of Sydney's wreck provided more than closure. It offered definitive forensic evidence that settled decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. An initial ROV examination confirmed what the German survivors had described. Sydney's bridge, midship section, and upper works showed severe damage. The accuracy of German gunnery was apparent on all four gun turrets, which had received multiple direct hits. Most critically, high-resolution images revealed a 15-centimeter shell hole through the bridge at the compass platform, confirming Detmers' account that the first salvo to hit Sydney was a direct hit to the bridge. The bow section had completely separated from the main hull and lay inverted on the seabed in the debris field, evidence of the catastrophic torpedo strike. The damage patterns were consistent with point-blank engagement rather than a long-range artillery duel, explaining how a merchant raider could overcome a superior warship. Unexpectedly, Both wrecks were found with their lower hulls almost completely exposed, allowing detailed examination for torpedo damage, a stroke of luck for investigators. The physical evidence aligned remarkably with the German accounts that had been viewed with suspicion for decades. In 2015, a further expedition by Curtin University and the Western Australian Museum used three-dimensional imaging to map the wreck sites in even greater detail. This new evidence appeared to confirm why Sydney was so quickly disabled. The destruction of her bridge within the first 30 seconds of battle eliminated her command structure and severely limited her ability to fight effectively. The forensic evidence revealed no support for conspiracy theories. There was no evidence of war crimes, massacres, or Japanese involvement. The battle's duration. The physical evidence matched the German accounts. Approximately 30 minutes of intense combat. Most significantly, the physical evidence explained why there were no survivors. With command decimated in the opening salvo, damage concentrated at vital points, and catastrophic torpedo damage, HMAS Sydney's crew had little chance of abandoning ship in an organized manner. An official commission determined that all archaeological evidence confirmed the battle occurred as the Germans had described, with no underhanded tricks or war crimes committed. The battle had been short, brutal, and catastrophic. A textbook case of successful deception and the devastating consequences of a momentary lapse in vigilance. HMS Sydney now rests as Australia's deepest military grave, a silent guardian on the ocean floor. The discovery brought closure to a nation and answers to families who had waited 67 years for the truth. In recognition of their historical and cultural significance, the wrecks of both Sydney and Kormoran were declared protected under the Commonwealth Historic Shipwrecks Act in 2008 and added to the National and Commonwealth Heritage Lists on March 14, 2011. They are recognized as sacred sites, final resting places for those who perished in service to their nations. A memorial to the crew of HMAS Sydney was completed in 2001 at Geraldton, Western Australia. Located high on Mount Scott, it looks out across the Indian Ocean toward the site where the ships fought and were destroyed. Every year, remembrance services honor the 645 Australians who never came home. The story of HMAS Sydney serves as a permanent reminder that in war, vigilance must never yield to routine, and that the price of a single tactical mistake can echo through generations. At 2,468 meters below the surface, Sydney stands not as a symbol of defeat, but as eternal proof of service and sacrifice. The sea kept Australia's greatest naval secret for 67 years. Now it serves as a monument to the men who made the ultimate sacrifice and a sobering reminder of war's cruel indifference, where in just minutes even the mightiest can fall, and heroes can vanish without a trace. This has been HMAS Sydney, lost and found from ocean attacks. If you appreciated this exploration of naval history, help us dive deeper by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Join our growing community of maritime history enthusiasts. New naval mysteries revealed every week. Ocean attacks, surfacing the truth beneath the waves.